It's a beautiful piece of furniture, and no, I am not going to paint it, but the minute that I saw this piece, I knew that it would make the most amazing rustic farmhouse kitchen island with a breakfast bar. I just had to figure out how to make that happen. Follow along if you want to see exactly how I navigate this one with a little help from my woodworking wizard neighbor. My first step was to remove the mirror and give the piece a thorough clean down. I'm removing all of the dust prior to spraying the piece with some vinegar and water, making sure to get in the drawers, in the body of the piece, getting rid of any cobwebs, any dirt, grease and grime. Next, I needed to fill the rather substantial holes that had been left where the mirror had been removed. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this, but the easiest way that I find when it's something as substantial as this is to just use some wood glue and a dowel. I didn't have the exact size of dowel that I needed for this one. It was so close. There was a little bit of separation though. So I cut my dowel, I put plenty of wood glue on it, popped it into the space after taping the underneath side of the hole, and then I worked some extra wood glue and sawdust into that space. This is essentially creating your own gap filler. It dries incredibly strong and can be sanded down completely smooth. While that was drying, I used my carbide scraper on the flat surfaces on the body, removing as much of the existing finish as I could before sanding with 120 grit sandpaper, followed by 180 and then 240 grit. Because I had those dowel sections on the top of the piece and a couple of superficial scratches, I dropped back down to 80 grit to remove the existing finish. You do have to make sure that when you jump back up from 80 grit that you do it quite slowly. So I went from 80 grit to remove the finish, followed by 120. Then I went up to 180, followed by 240 grit. You can get a good close-up here of that little glued dowel section. And if you are familiar with pine, you would see that this just looks like any other knot on the surface. It blends really well with everything else that's going on. To remove the existing finish from the turned legs, I'm using acetone. Now, acetone works like magic on some finishes. It doesn't work on some, but it's definitely worth a try because within a couple of minutes, you can have a finish completely removed from a turned leg like this, as opposed to doing hours of hand sanding. So you can see here, I've wrapped each of the legs in a microfiber cloth. I saturate that cloth with the acetone, and then I am rubbing the leg down. So it melts the finish, and then the cloth absorbs whatever product is melting off. Now, what would a kitchen island be without a drop leaf extension? But could I make this happen? I wasn't sure. So enter my woodworking wizard neighbor, Richard, to help me out on this one. Recently, I'd salvaged an old tabletop from bulk cleanup, so I had the timber to be able to do the extension, but it needed to be supported. So after a little measure, a little bit of rucka, we worked out that it could be done, and I wanted to use the timber that was on the sides of the mirror as the supports to be some little brackets. Richard is a member of our local men's shed, so he actually took the tabletop down and cut it down there with all of the amazing tools that they have. He brought the piece back and he's rounding off the edges here. Next, he used a curving bit with a 10 mil radius to route the edge of the timber. We couldn't get the exact match to the other routed edge, but we got so close. Where it wasn't quite matchy, we were just going to have to come back by hand and blend it. Richard also worked out how to cut the little wings off the side of the mirror to use as brackets. We did have to cut them down a little bit so that they would recess into the body of the piece, and we attached them using 2 hinges. Next, it was time to attach the extension, and we used 2 piano hinges to be able to do this. There was a little bit of variation between the tabletop, the existing tabletop, and the extension. So we used Venetian blinds to actually pack out the hinge. So that's just to make sure that everything was level once it was flipped over. When they were secured in place, I used a Stanley blade to score the Venetian blind, and then I broke away the overhang. I cleaned up the underside of the table using my carbide scraper and my sander, and moved on to measuring up and cutting some ply to put in between where the brackets and the drawers would be. I used my jigsaw to cut here, and I also cut a notch out in the center so that it could slip over the center bar that was between both of the drawers. Because the brackets were recessing back into the body of the piece, there was still a tiny bit of separation between the actual extension and the bracket. So I put these little wedges into place so that as the bracket came out, it would slip up onto that wedge and make everything level up top. As a tall human, I am of the opinion that kitchen islands need to be at a practical working height. You don't want to be hunching over when you are prepping. So in order to get this kitchen island up to that height, I'm actually going to add some different legs. Richard had actually found 4 legs that were the perfect height down at the men's shed that he was able to convert to be able to fit this piece. So you can see here he's using a countersink bit, which is actually drilling a hole down into that existing leg. And then the leg that I'm going to be adding has the plug end, so it slots into that hole. In keeping with that rustic farmhouse vibe, I'm using a mid-brown tone on this one. This is a stain by Cabot. It's Brazilian roast. You would have seen me use it in the past. It's a really beautiful, rich chocolate shade. And I did a total of 3 coats using a sponge and then wiping off the excess with an old towel. Because this is essentially a food prepping area, I wanted to seal the entire piece with something that was water resistant, stain resistant, but above all food safe. So I chose FIDDES Hard Wax Oil. This one comes in a range of sheen levels. I'm using the matte clear here, and I'm just applying with a 4mm nap roller. I applied 2 coats of the FIDDES with the roller on all of the flat surfaces, but when I got to the turned legs, I actually changed it up and used an old sock. Yes, I'm wearing a glove underneath that, but I just felt like I had more control around all of the curves applying like this. Chose some antiqued brass handles for this piece, so I matched up the hinges that were on the back with some European gold rub and buff. Now, here's a quick reminder of where we started on this one, and this is where we are now. It is such a practical upcycle. Aesthetically, it has a lot of beautiful elements, that scalloping, the turned legs, the handles, the timber grain, but it's the functionality that does it for me. I love that I can stand at this kitchen island and not hunch over, and I'm 5'11", and I love the fact that you've got the option of that extension. It's more bench space. It could be a breakfast bar, but as always, I would love to know what you guys think about this piece, so jump in the comments and let me know. Is this one a nail or a fail?